Hi students, today we're going to be talking about cell respiration, a process that happens in the cells. This is how carbohydrates get broken down in the cells when oxygen is present. We'll also discuss fermentation, another way that cells can break down carbohydrates, and that happens when oxygen is not present, like when we ferment sauerkraut. So generally speaking, the process of cell respiration combines sugars with oxygen. This forms carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of ATP. So this is a process that requires oxygen. It's called aerobic. That means requiring oxygen. This usually involves the breakdown of glucose to carbon dioxide and water. However, other molecules can be broken down as well. Some of our larger molecules, like our polysaccharides, can be cleaved through hydrolysis to form smaller monomers like glucose or similar types of monomers, and those can be respired through cell respiration. We are going to focus on just glucose and its path through this process. Cell respiration happens in a step-by-step fashion. So when the cell breaks down glucose to extract energy, it doesn't happen very quickly in terms of just combustion, but it happens in a process that releases energy slowly to be more efficient, so that energy can be captured to make ATP. And ATP, again, is that high energy molecule that can be used to drive any kinds of cellular process. This picture shows the process in a chemical formula, starting with glucose, C6H12O6. We have 6 carbons bonded to 12 hydrogens and 6 oxygens. And that combines with oxygen, specifically 6 molecules of O2. So oxygen likes to come combined as pairs, oxygen, oxygen, O2. That's the type of oxygen that is in our atmosphere most often. When these combine, the arrow shows us the direction of the reaction. We end up with 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and energy in the form of ATP again. Those 6's in front of the O2, CO2, and H2O show us how many atoms and molecules we have of those. So when you see 6O2, that means we have 6 oxygen pairs for a total of 12. When we have 6 CO2, that means we have 6 molecules of carbon dioxide. So if we wanted to count all the carbons and oxygens for that, we would see 6 atoms of carbon and 12 atoms of oxygen if we counted them all up. By putting those numbers there, we can see that this is a balanced equation, and that means there are the same numbers of atoms of each element on the left side of the arrow as the right side of the arrow. So we're not losing any carbons or hydrogens along the way. You can also see in this picture the words oxidation and reduction. We're going to talk about that today. Oxidation occurs when electrons are removed from an atom or molecule. Electrons are hard to visualize, but you can see the presence of them or the evidence of them with hydrogens. Since electrons are negatively charged and hydrogens tend to be positively charged, they like to travel together. So when we see glucose being oxidized to CO2, what we're seeing in that process is hydrogens and electrons being released, taken out. They're transferred to the water. And reduction is the opposite. That occurs when electrons and hydrogens going with them are added to a molecule or atom. And so with our O2, if we add electrons and hydrogens, we end up with something like H2O. This is called a redox reaction, where oxidation and reduction happen at the same time. So this type of reaction is common, and these are 2 reactions that occur simultaneously at the same time. Where one molecule gives off an electron, it's oxidized, The other molecule gains the electron and it's reduced. So one way to think about that reduction or remember it is that when a molecule gains a negatively charged particle, hence the electron, it becomes reduced in charge. It will lower its charge. So if we start with a neutral molecule and we add just an electron to it, we make the charge a -1 charge, so we've reduced it. In cellular respiration, there are two important coenzymes that help this oxidation-reduction reaction. These coenzymes carry electrons and hydrogens, and for a lot of the reaction, for the step-by-step reaction, we're going to see that these carry the electrons and hydrogens to the last stage of cellular respiration. So these will oxidize a metabolite by accepting the electrons, so the molecule in the process can be oxidized. And these can also reduce a metabolite by donating electrons. So these can oxidize by taking the electrons. In turn, they are reduced, and they can reduce by giving the electrons away. They get oxidized. See, oxidation reduction happens at the same time. So these coenzymes are called NAD+ and FAD. You don't have to remember those long names over there, but do know that there are two different coenzymes. Each NAD+ molecule can be used over and over again, and same with the FAD molecule. NAD takes 2 electrons and 1 hydrogen ion in each of its molecule to become NADH. That's its reduced form, so that's when it's carrying the electrons. The FAD can sometimes be used instead of NAD+. It depends on the cell's biological makeup, chemical makeup. FAD is just a little bit different in that it can accept 2 electrons and 2 hydrogens to become FADH2. So FADH2 is its reduced form. And we'll see these work throughout the process of cell respiration. Keep in mind that electrons have energy, and following the electrons through the path of cellular respiration is following a path of energy. Like I said before, electrons and hydrogens go together. So when you see a molecule gaining an H, like in the previous slide, that means it's accepted an electron along with that H for the time being. If a molecule loses an H, it loses an electron. The breakdown of glucose, cellular respiration, has 3 phases: glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain. Glycolysis occurs just outside of the mitochondria, and that is the splitting of glucose. Lysis means splitting, glyco for sugar. That's generally what happens in that step. The sugar then is smaller in 2 parts and goes into the mitochondria, crossing the double membrane and getting into the matrix. In the matrix, the citric acid cycle breaks down the glucose molecules, the 2 of them, into further products. And along the way, electrons and hydrogens are removed. The electrons in this slide are the little E's that are blue, those little spheres. All the electrons and hydrogens end up going to the electron transport chain. And in the electron transport chain, the energy from the electrons gets harvested. So energy tallies are shown at the bottom of this slide with ATP. In the first step, 2 ATPs are produced. In the citric acid cycle, 2 ATPs are produced. And in the final step of cell respiration, the electron transport chain, 32 or 34 ATPs are produced. That's a best case scenario. A lot of the time we see numbers less than 30. It depends on the cell and how efficient it is at breaking down the sugar. So let's talk about the first step, glycolysis, sugar splitting. This occurs the same way in all organisms, and it happens in the cytoplasm of all organisms. Notice that it doesn't need oxygen and it doesn't need a mitochondria because it happens in the cytoplasm. It first involves an energy investment. That is, a little bit of ATP is needed to split glucose into two molecules. So a little ATP is used, glucose gets split into two molecules of G3P. That stands for glycerol 3-phosphate. Then the glycerol 3-phosphates are oxidized. Remember what that means? Electrons are removed from them. So the electrons, along with the hydrogens, get transferred to NAD+, making it NADH. The NADH then will travel or bring those electrons to the electron transport chain. So what goes in and what comes out? Glucose gets split to G3P after it's oxidized. Its final product at the end of glycolysis is pyruvate. So glucose gets split into two pyruvate molecules overall. Two NAD pluses pick up the electrons and hydrogens to become NADH. Two ATP molecules are used. That means ATP gets split apart into ADP and P. And 4 ATP molecules are made. That means we get a net of 2 ATP molecules. So we have to put in 2, we get out 4, we net 2 there. What happens next depends on whether or not oxygen is present. So up until this point, oxygen hasn't been needed, but now if oxygen's present, aerobic pathways will happen, that is, oxygen-rich pathways, and the pyruvate will enter the mitochondria for further metabolism. If oxygen is absent or in limited quantities, the pyruvate will further be reduced in the cytoplasm, and that process is called fermentation. I have a rock climber in this picture because they're using up sugars, breaking apart glucose molecules, and after a while, your body might become limited in oxygen. You might get out of breath. So our bodies are designed to go through aerobic metabolism most of the time, but we can also do anaerobic metabolism and break down sugars even when we are out of breath. So I'm going to end here and pick this idea up in the next video. So take a little break and we'll start back in with the citric acid cycle.